Mom, Mom, look at me. I'm not gonna let you go. I'm not gonna let you down. I'm gonna do everything possible to save you. I promise you that.
I found a way. A family wants to help. But you need to dress properly. You need to look presentable when we meet them.
Go, baby. Let him help us. Please.
Malcolm and Avery driving down this winding road. The mountains sing as we let the story unfold. Malcolm and Avery in the Cadillac's embrace.
This isn't a foundation office.
It's the family estate. They wanted to meet somewhere private. You must be Avery.
Yes. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. It's beautiful.
Yes, it is. Welcome. Please come in.
Thank you for having us.
The pleasure is mine. My grandson is a man of great wealth and standing.
What does his grandson have to do with me?
He has chosen you. You would be wise to accept.
This isn't what we agreed to!
You accepted $3 million for your wife. You should have asked who she would marry. The arrangement is final. Avery is the chosen bride. There is no other choice.
Please, sir. Please, I'm begging you, don't do this. Please, I didn't know about any of this.
In the next few seconds, Avery is about to walk into a marriage she never agreed to, with a man she's never met, in a house that just bought her like property. And what happens behind that bedroom door is going to change everything. Stay with me till the end. You do not want to miss this. But first, comment down below where you're watching from tonight. Now let's get right into the story. 3 weeks earlier, Avery Monroe sat in a plastic chair beside her mother's hospital bed, watching the slow rise and fall of Evelyn's chest under the thin blue blanket. The machine beside the bed beeped in a steady rhythm that had become the only clock Avery trusted anymore. She hadn't slept properly in 4 days. Her eyes were rimmed red, her hair pulled back in a hurried knot, strands falling loose around her face. She wore the same gray cardigan she'd worn to work and back and to the hospital again, because there hadn't been time to change, because there hadn't been time for anything except sitting in this chair and waiting for numbers on a screen to tell her whether her mother would live. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. You're still here. Where else would I be? Home, sleeping, living your life. Evelyn's voice was thin, stretched over the effort of speaking. You have a husband waiting for you. Avery managed a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. Malcolm understands. Evelyn studied her daughter's face for a long moment. She reached up weakly and touched Avery's cheek. You've lost weight. I'm fine, Mom. You're not eating. I said I'm fine. Avery caught herself, softened her tone. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. Evelyn's hand fell back to the blanket, exhausted from the effort of holding it up. The doctor came by this morning, while you were getting coffee. Avery's spine straightened. What did he say? The treatment they're recommending. It's expensive, Avery. More than we have, more than insurance will cover. How much? Evelyn told her. Avery sat very still. The number moved through her like something physical, something that pressed against her ribs from the inside. She had already sold what she could sell. She had already borrowed what she could borrow. She had already asked every person she knew to ask. We'll figure it out, Avery said, because it was the only thing left to say. Avery, we'll figure it out, Mom. She took her mother's hand again, held it against her chest. I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to do everything possible to save you. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening, Avery came home to find Malcolm sitting at the kitchen table, a folder closed in front of him. His hands folded on top of it like he was guarding something. You're home early, Avery said, setting her bag down. I need to talk to you about something. Something in his voice made her stop moving. Malcolm rarely sounded serious. He rarely sounded like he'd thought something through before saying it. Is everything okay? I might have found a way to help your mom. Avery's breath caught. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down slowly. What do you mean? There's a family, very wealthy. They're connected to some people I know through work. They're willing to cover the entire cost of your mother's treatment. All of it. Why would they do that? Malcolm hesitated. It was brief, barely a second, but Avery noticed it. They have a foundation. They fund cases like this sometimes, medical hardship cases. Malcolm, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me right away? I wanted to make sure it was real before I got your hopes up. He reached across the table and took her hands. His palms were warm, but there was something rehearsed in the gesture, something that didn't quite match his eyes. There's a meeting. They want to meet you before anything is finalized. It's just a formality. A meeting? With who? The family. It's tomorrow evening. He squeezed her hands. You should dress well. Look presentable. First impressions matter with people like this. Avery's mind was already racing ahead, past the strange details, toward the only thing that mattered. Her mother. A cure. A future that had a shape to it again, instead of just fear. Okay, she said. Okay. Whatever they need. I'll be ready. Malcolm smiled and looked away from her as he did it. The next morning, Avery visited her mother before work, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, practically glowing for the first time in weeks. Malcolm found help, she said. A family. They're going to cover everything. Evelyn's face didn't light up the way Avery expected. Something crossed behind her eyes, quick and uncertain, before she smoothed it over. What family? I don't know all the details yet. There's a meeting tonight. I have to make a good impression, apparently. Avery laughed, a little embarrassed by how relieved she felt. It doesn't matter who they are, Mom. It matters that they can help you. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she reached for Avery's hand. Whatever this is, whatever they ask of you, just remember you have a choice. You always have a choice. Mom, don't worry. It's just a meeting. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. Avery kissed her mother's forehead. Go, baby, get some rest. I'll come by after, and I'll tell you everything. Evelyn's fingers tightened around hers for just a second longer than necessary. Go, baby. Let him help us, please. Avery didn't think anything of the tremor in her mother's voice. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself it was hope, finally, after weeks of nothing but bad news. And hope could make a person's voice shake too. She had no idea that her mother's warning was the last honest thing anyone would say to her for a long time. That night, Avery stood in front of her closet for nearly an hour. Malcolm had been specific in a way that unsettled her slightly. Not casual, not business formal. Something that photographed well. Something that made an impression. She finally chose a fitted red gown, sophisticated and elegant, cut close to her frame without being revealing. She pinned her hair back, applied light makeup, and studied herself in the mirror. She looked like someone about to be presented. She didn't let herself think about why that thought had occurred to her at all. Malcolm appeared in the bedroom doorway, dressed sharply, and stopped when he saw her. You look perfect. Are you sure this is right? It feels like a lot for a foundation meeting. It's exactly right. He crossed the room, straightened the strap of her dress that didn't need straightening, and stepped back to look at her again. Something flickered across his face. Not admiration, something closer to relief, like a man checking that a delivery matched its description. Avery didn't see it. She was too busy hoping. The drive out of the city took nearly an hour. The buildings thinned, then disappeared, replaced by long stretches of trees and quiet roads that curved upward into hills. Avery watched the scenery change through the window, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating a little faster with every mile. You've been quiet, she said. Just thinking. Malcolm's hands were tight on the steering wheel. Nervous, I guess. I want this to go well for you. For us, Avery corrected gently. He glanced at her, then back at the road. Right. For us. The car eventually slowed in front of a set of iron gates so tall, Avery had to lean forward to see the top of them. Beyond the gates, a private road curved through manicured grounds, disappearing into darkness, lit only by low garden lamps. Malcolm, this isn't a foundation office. It's the family estate. They wanted to meet somewhere private. The gates began to open on their own, slow and silent, revealing more of the grounds beyond. Avery's stomach tightened, not with fear yet, just the strange electric awareness that she was crossing into something far larger than she understood. A figure emerged near the entrance as the car came to a stop. An elderly man, tall despite his age, dressed in a dark tailored coat, leaning lightly on a polished wooden cane that seemed more habit than necessity. He watched the car approach with his hands folded over the head of the cane, his expression unreadable, his posture perfectly straight. Malcolm stepped out first and hurried around to open Avery's door, his movements too quick, too eager. Avery stepped out into the cool night air, and the elderly man's eyes moved over her once, slowly, assessing. "You must be Avery," he said. His voice was calm, cultured, carrying the weight of a man used to being listened to. "Yes. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Yoo Song-ho." He inclined his head slightly. "Come inside. There is someone waiting to meet you." Avery glanced at Malcolm, expecting him to walk beside her. He hung back near the car, his hands in his pockets, not meeting her eyes. "Malcolm? Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right behind you." Something in his voice made her hesitate. But Sung-ho was already walking toward the house, and the massive front doors were already opening, and staff were already stepping forward to greet her, and the entire evening had the feel of a machine that had been set into motion long before she arrived, moving now with a momentum she couldn't slow down even if she wanted to. She followed him inside. The interior of the house took her breath away. Not with excess, but with restraint. Every surface spoke of money that had never needed to announce itself. Marble floors polished to a soft shine. Artwork that looked older than entire countries. A staircase that curved upward into shadow, wide enough for a dozen people to walk it side by side. "This is beautiful," Avery said, because the silence had started to feel unbearable. "It has been in the family for 3 generations," Seong-ho said, leading her through the entrance hall. "Tell me, Avery, what has your husband told you about tonight? That your family runs a foundation. That you help with medical hardship cases. He said there's a meeting, a formality, before anything moves forward with my mother's treatment." Song-ho stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, something like pity crossed his features before it disappeared again behind his composure. "Is that what he told you?" he said. It wasn't a question. Avery's smile faltered. "Yes. Isn't that right?" Before Seong-ho could answer, footsteps echoed from behind them. Malcolm had finally come inside, his face pale, his eyes darting between Avery and the old man. "Mr. Yoo, can we speak privately for a moment? There is nothing to discuss that your wife should not hear." Sung-ho's voice hardened slightly. "The arrangement was made clear to you weeks ago. I understand that, but she doesn't know." "Doesn't know what?" Avery's voice rose, panic threading through it now. "Malcolm, what is he talking about? What arrangement?" Malcolm's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Vivian's face flashed through his mind, his mother's voice telling him not to overthink it, telling him this was the only way, telling him $3 million would fix everything, and Avery would understand eventually. He hadn't planned on this moment. He hadn't planned on standing in this hallway with his wife looking at him like the floor was disappearing beneath her feet. "Avery," he started. "Tell me what's happening. Right now." Seong-ho stepped forward, his cane tapping once against the marble, silencing the room. "Your husband accepted $3 million, Avery, in exchange for your marriage into this family." The words landed and did not immediately make sense. Avery heard them the way a person hears something underwater, distorted, delayed. "What?" $3 million, Seong-ho repeated, without cruelty, simply stating a fact. "Your mother's treatment was never the arrangement." It was the story used to bring you here. Avery turned to Malcolm, searching his face for a denial, for anything that would make this untrue. He was staring at the floor. Malcolm, tell him he's wrong. Silence. Tell him he's wrong. Avery, His voice broke. I was going to explain. I just needed you to come here first. You sold me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, disbelief and horror colliding inside her chest. You sold me like I was something you owned. It's not like that. The money, it was for your mother. I was going to use it for her treatment. I swear. Was going to. Something cold moved through Avery's body. You haven't paid it yet? Malcolm didn't answer, and that silence told her everything. This is not what we agreed to, Malcolm said suddenly, turning back to Song-ho, his voice climbing toward desperation. You said I would still be part of this. You said there would be an arrangement that worked for everyone. Song-ho's expression didn't change. You accepted $3 million for your wife. You should have asked who she would marry. That's not fair. I have rights here. You accepted the money willingly. Song-ho's voice remained level, almost gentle, which made it worse. No one forced your hand. A voice came from the top of the staircase, calm and cold, cutting through the tension like something sharpened. At least he got what he came for. Every head turned. A man stood at the top of the stairs in a wheelchair, dressed in dark clothing, his face partially shadowed by the low lighting. Even from a distance, Avery could feel the weight of his stare. Dohyun, Song-ho said, a note of warning in his voice. The man in the wheelchair said nothing further. He simply watched, his jaw tight, his eyes moving from Malcolm to Avery and back again, cataloging the scene with open contempt. Avery's legs felt unsteady beneath her. The room was tilting, the walls pressing closer, the reality of her situation collapsing down onto her chest until she could barely breathe. Please, she said, turning back to Song-ho, her voice cracking. Please, there has to be a mistake. My mother is sick. She needs that money. Please, I don't understand what you want from me. Song-ho studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face, the genuine confusion, the genuine terror, something in his expression shifted, just slightly. But it didn't stop him. He turned to the waiting maid standing quietly near the staircase. Take her to my grandson's room. No, please. Avery took a step backward, her hands lifting instinctively, panic overtaking every rational thought. Please, I didn't agree to this. I didn't know, please, someone has to listen to me, please. Malcolm reached for her arm. Avery, just go with them, we'll figure this out, I'll fix this. She yanked her arm away from him, tears finally breaking loose down her face. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. The maid approached gently, her voice soft. This way, please, Miss Monroe. Avery looked back one last time at Malcolm, standing frozen near the door, unable to meet her eyes. She looked at Song-ho, composed and immovable. She looked up at the top of the staircase, where the man in the wheelchair had already turned and disappeared into the dark hallway beyond, as though the scene below him meant nothing at all. Please, she whispered one final time, to no one in particular, to everyone in the room who had already decided her fate before she'd walked through the front door. No one answered. The maid gently guided her toward the staircase, and Avery's legs carried her forward even as every instinct screamed at her to run, because there was nowhere left to run to, because the mother she was trying to save was lying in a hospital bed across the ocean, and because whatever was waiting for her at the top of those stairs was now, somehow, her only way back to her. She climbed the stairs in silence, her red gown catching the low light, her hands trembling at her sides, walking toward a closed door, and a stranger who had already made it clear exactly how much he despised the sight of her. She had no way of knowing yet that the man behind that door was about to become the only person in her life who had never lied to her. The maid stopped in front of a set of double doors at the end of the hallway and knocked once, softly. Sir, your grandfather has sent her up. There was no answer from inside. The maid glanced at Avery, offered a small apologetic look, and pushed the door open just enough for Avery to step through before retreating back down the hallway, leaving her alone in the doorway of a room she had never asked to enter. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a lamp near the window and the pale wash of moonlight through tall glass doors leading to a balcony. Avery stepped inside slowly, her heels silent against the thick carpet, her eyes adjusting to the low light. She didn't see him at first. He was near the window, his wheelchair angled toward the glass, his back mostly to her. He hadn't moved since she entered, hadn't acknowledged her presence at all, and for a moment, Avery wondered if he even knew she was there. "Excuse me," she said quietly. He turned. The wheel of his chair caught the edge of a folded rug beneath him, the wheel jolting sideways, and his balance shifted hard to one side. Avery moved without thinking, closing the distance between them in 2 quick steps, reaching out to steady him before he could tip further. Her hands landed on his shoulder and forearm. Their bodies collided awkwardly, her knee bumping against the armrest of the chair, her face suddenly close to his. He froze. Then he pulled away from her so fast, the chair rolled backward, putting distance between them. "Don't touch me." Avery straightened, stunned. "You were about to fall. I know how to handle my own chair." His voice was low, controlled, but something sharp moved beneath it. "I don't need you catching me like I'm made of glass." "I wasn't trying to." Avery stopped herself, pressing her lips together, forcing her breathing to slow. She had just been dragged up a flight of stairs into a stranger's bedroom after learning her husband had sold her like property, and now the stranger was angry at her for trying to keep him from falling out of his chair. "I'm sorry," she said, though the word came out flat, drained of anything but exhaustion. He studied her for a long moment in the low light. Up close, she could see him properly now. Sharp features, dark eyes that held no warmth, a jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. He was younger than she expected, handsome in a way that felt almost incidental to how cold he seemed. "So you're the one," he said finally. "The one what?" "The one my grandfather bought." Avery flinched like she'd been struck. "I wasn't sold. I didn't agree to any of this. That's not what the paperwork says. I don't know anything about paperwork. My husband told me your family was helping with my mother's medical treatment. That's the only reason I came here." Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it, hated how thin and desperate it sounded. "I found out what this actually was 5 minutes ago, standing downstairs in front of your entire family." He wheeled himself back another few inches, watching her face carefully now, searching for the seam in her story, the place where the performance would slip. "Convincing," he said quietly. "Excuse me? You do it well." The tears, the confusion. He tilted his head slightly. "Most of them, at least, wait until they're alone with me before they start pretending they didn't know what they signed up for." Avery's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Most of them? How many women have stood in this room?" Something flickered behind his eyes, gone as fast as it appeared. "Enough to know how this works. I'm not one of them." She took a step forward, despite every part of her wanting to run. "I don't want your money. I don't want anything from your family, except to go home and be with my mother while she's dying in a hospital bed. Because that man downstairs took the money that was supposed to save her life, and did God knows what with it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room held still, the distant sound of the estate's grounds outside the window the only noise between them. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then you should be angrier at him than at me. I'm angry at everyone in this house right now." Avery wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand, refusing to let herself fully break down in front of him. "Including you, for looking at me like I'm something you need to catalog and dispose of." His jaw tightened again, but he said nothing. A soft knock came at the door before it opened. Song-ho stepped inside, his expression composed as always, his cane tapping lightly against the floor as he crossed the threshold. "I trust introductions have been made," he said. "Grandfather." Dohyun's voice turned hard immediately. "I told you I didn't want this." And I told you that you cannot spend the rest of your life hiding behind that door. Song-ho's tone didn't rise, but there was steel underneath it. You have shut yourself away from everyone since the accident. I will not watch you disappear inside these walls for the rest of your life. So your solution was to buy me a wife. My solution was to give you a reason to leave this room. Seong-ho glanced briefly at Avery, something unreadable passing over his face, before returning his attention to his grandson. What you do with that reason is your choice. Dohyun's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. I don't need someone to pity me. No one is asking you to be pitied. Sung-ho's voice softened, just barely. I am asking you to try living again. He turned toward Avery, before Dohyun could respond further. Miss Monroe, a room has been prepared for you down the hall. You are welcome to rest tonight. In the morning, we will discuss the details of your situation. There's nothing to discuss, Avery said. I want to go home. Your husband has already left the estate. Seong-ho's words landed evenly, without cruelty, but they hit harder than anything else that had happened all night. He did not wait for you. Avery felt the floor tilt beneath her again. Malcolm had left. He had actually gotten in the car and driven away, leaving her standing in a stranger's house with nothing but the dress on her back and the horrifying knowledge of what he'd done. He just left me here? It would seem so. Song-ho's expression remained neutral, but something behind his eyes suggested he found the man's cowardice as distasteful as she did. You are welcome to stay until you decide what you wish to do next. No one will force you to remain longer than that. And if I want to leave right now, tonight, then a car will be arranged. Seong-ho inclined his head. This is not a prison, Miss Monroe, whatever it may feel like tonight. Avery looked between the old man and his grandson, both of them watching her with entirely different expressions. Seong-ho with something close to genuine concern. Dohyun with a wall built so high around him that nothing seemed capable of reaching past it. I need to think, she said finally, her voice hollow with exhaustion. Of course. Seong-ho gestured toward the door. The maid will show you to your room. As Avery turned to leave, Dohyun's voice stopped her at the threshold. You'll take the offer eventually, he said quietly. They always do. Avery turned back to face him, something steady settling into her voice, despite the tremor still running through her hands. I don't want anything from you, not your money, not your name, not your pity. I want my mother to live, and I want to go home. That's all I've ever wanted since the moment I walked through that gate. She left the room without waiting for a response, and Dohyun sat in the silence she left behind, staring at the closed door, something unfamiliar shifting in his chest that he refused to name. The next morning, Avery woke in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto sheets softer than anything she'd ever slept on. For one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memory of the previous night crashed back into her all at once, and she sat up so fast her head spun. A soft knock came at the door. Miss Monroe? Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Avery dressed in the clothes that had somehow appeared, folded neatly on a chair. Simple, elegant, clearly expensive, clearly not anything she owned. She stared at them for a long moment before putting them on, telling herself it meant nothing, that surviving the day mattered more than the principle of wearing clothes she hadn't chosen. Downstairs, she found Han Mira sitting alone at a long dining table, a cup of tea in front of her, untouched. Dohyun's mother looked up as Avery entered, her expression polite but distant, studying Avery with the same careful assessment Song-ho had used the night before. Please, sit, Mira said. Avery sat carefully across from her, unsure of the etiquette, unsure of anything in this house. You must have questions, Mira said. I have more questions than I know what to do with. Mira poured tea into a second cup and slid it toward Avery without being asked. My father-in-law believes he is helping my son. I am not certain I agree with his methods, but I understand his intentions. Your son doesn't want me here. My son doesn't want anyone here. Mira's voice was quiet, careful. Since the accident, He has closed himself off from nearly everyone who tries to get close to him. He assumes every kindness is either pity or opportunism. It has made him very difficult to know. I'm not trying to know him. I'm trying to survive whatever this situation is and get back to my mother. Mira studied her for a long moment. That, at least, sounds honest. The sound of wheels against the hardwood floor announced Dohyun's arrival before Avery saw him. He entered the dining room, glanced briefly at his mother, then at Avery, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," Mira said to him. He didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he wheeled himself to the head of the table and addressed Avery directly. "How much?" Avery blinked. "Excuse me? How much do you want to leave? Name a number." His voice was flat, businesslike, as though he were negotiating a contract rather than speaking to a person. "I'll have it transferred today, and you can walk out that door and never think about this family again." Avery set her cup down carefully, anger rising steady and hot beneath her ribs. "I don't want your money. Everyone wants the money eventually." He leaned back slightly. "Name a number." "Nothing." Avery met his eyes directly, refusing to look away. "I want nothing from you." Something flickered across his face, surprise, quickly buried beneath suspicion. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't care what you believe." Avery stood from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "I came here because my husband lied to me. I stayed here last night because I had nowhere else to go. And this morning, I'm sitting at a table, being offered money to disappear by a man who has decided who I am before I've said more than 10 words to him." Mira watched the exchange in silence, her eyes moving between her son and the woman standing at the table with her hands trembling at her sides. "You think I'm like the others," Avery continued. "Fine. Think whatever you want. But I'm telling you the truth, and one day, you're going to have to sit with the fact that you didn't listen." She walked out of the dining room without waiting for a response, leaving Dohyun staring after her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Mira spoke quietly into the silence he left behind. "She didn't take the offer. She's playing a longer game," Dohyun said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Perhaps." Mira sipped her tea slowly. "Or perhaps you have spent so long assuming the worst of people that you no longer recognize honesty when it's sitting across from you." Dohyun said nothing. He stared at the empty chair Avery had left behind, the echo of her voice still hanging in the room, and something in his carefully constructed certainty had begun, quietly, to crack. Over the following days, Avery remained at the estate, unsure of where else to go, unwilling to call Malcolm, unable yet to face returning home to a life that had collapsed so completely underneath her. She spent her mornings avoiding the family as much as possible, walking the grounds alone, calling the hospital every few hours for updates on her mother's condition that never seemed to improve. She was in the garden on the third afternoon when she heard the wheels of a chair on the gravel path behind her. "You're still here," Dohyun said. "You noticed." "Hard not to. You've been avoiding the house for 3 days." Avery didn't turn to face him. "I'm avoiding you specifically. I've noticed that too." Something in his tone made her glance back. He wasn't glaring at her the way he had the first night. His expression was more guarded than hostile now, something closer to curiosity buried beneath the wall he kept around himself. "What do you want, Dohyun?" It was the first time she'd said his name directly to him. He seemed to notice it too, something shifting slightly in his posture. "I had someone look into your situation," he said. Avery's stomach dropped. "You investigated me. I investigate everyone who enters this house uninvited." He wheeled himself closer along the path. "Your mother is at County General. Stage of illness is serious. The treatment plan submitted by her doctors 2 weeks ago has not been paid for." Avery's throat tightened. "I know. Your husband received the funds 11 days ago. I know that too. He hasn't paid a single invoice." Dohyun watched her face carefully as he spoke, cataloging every flicker of reaction. Not one. Avery's hands began to shake. She had suspected it, had feared it in the quiet hours of the night when sleep wouldn't come, but hearing it confirmed out loud, made something inside her chest cave in completely. He took the money and did nothing, she whispered. It would appear so. Tears slid down her face before she could stop them, and this time she didn't try to hide them from him. She sat down hard on the stone bench beside the path, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with a grief that had been building for days and finally had somewhere to go. Dohyun sat in silence beside her, unsure of what to do with the sight of her crying, unsure why watching it made something twist uncomfortably behind his ribs. I believed him, Avery said through her hands. I believed he was finally doing something right. I let myself hope, and he used that hope to sell me like I was nothing, and my mother is still lying in that hospital bed because he couldn't even follow through on the one selfish thing he did. I paid the bills, Dohyun said quietly. Avery lowered her hands slowly, staring at him. What? I paid your mother's outstanding medical bills. 2 days ago, the treatment has already begun. His voice remained flat, controlled, but he wouldn't quite meet her eyes as he said it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you thinking I was trying to buy something from you. Avery stared at him, stunned into silence, the tears still wet on her face. Why would you do that? Because your husband took millions of dollars because a woman was dying, and then he abandoned her anyway. His jaw tightened. I don't understand people who can do that. I never will. You don't even know me. No, he agreed. I don't. They sat together on the bench in silence, the garden quiet around them. Something unspoken passing between two people who had started the week as strangers, forced into a stranger's arrangement, and were now, slowly, without either of them fully realizing it, becoming something else entirely. Avery wiped her face and looked at him properly for the first time since she'd arrived. Thank you. He nodded once, sharply, uncomfortable with gratitude in a way that suggested he received it rarely. Don't read too much into it. I won't, she said, though something in her voice suggested she already had. Neither of them noticed how long they sat there afterward, the sun moving lower behind the garden walls, the silence between them no longer as sharp as it had been 3 days earlier. But peace, in that house, never lasted long, and neither of them yet knew that Malcolm was already making his way back toward the estate, driven by regret disguised as love, ready to unravel everything that had quietly begun to take root between them. 2 weeks passed, and something in the estate had shifted so quietly that neither Avery nor Dohyun could pinpoint the exact moment it happened. She stopped avoiding the house. He stopped retreating to his room the second she entered a space. Their conversations, once clipped and guarded, had grown longer, sharper, filled with the kind of arguing that neither of them actually wanted to end. You left your coffee cup on my desk again, Dohyun said one morning, wheeling into the study where Avery sat reading. It's not your desk. It's a desk in a house with 40 rooms. It's the desk I use. Then move it. I'm not your maid. I didn't ask you to be. He wheeled closer, setting the cup down pointedly in front of her. I asked you to clean up after yourself. Avery arched an eyebrow at him, unbothered. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Manufacturing a reason to talk to me. His jaw tightened, a flush of something crossing his face that wasn't quite anger. I don't need a reason to talk to you. This is my house. Sure it is. She picked the cup back up and took a slow sip, watching him over the rim. Keep telling yourself that. He stared at her for a moment, something almost like the beginning of a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth before he caught it, and smoothed his expression back into irritation. You're insufferable. You like it. He didn't answer that. He wheeled himself back out of the room, and Avery watched him go, a small, satisfied smile tugging at her own lips, one she didn't bother hiding since no one was there to see it. It had become a pattern between them. Small provocations, small arguments, neither of them willing to back down, both of them somehow finding their way back to each other within hours, no matter how sharp the exchange had been. What Avery hadn't expected was how much she'd started to look forward to it. She found him 3 evenings later in a room she hadn't seen before, tucked at the end of a hallway on the ground floor, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open and found a private gym, mats laid across the floor, parallel bars installed along one wall. Dohyun was on the mat, out of his chair, gripping the bars with both hands, his legs trembling beneath him as he tried to hold himself upright. Sweat darkened his shirt. His face was tight with strain and something closer to fury. Avery froze in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. His arms gave out. He collapsed sideways onto the mat, his breath ragged, his hands slamming against the floor in frustration. Avery moved instinctively toward him. "Don't," he snapped, not looking up. "Don't help me." She stopped where she was, her hands hovering uselessly at her sides. Then, instead of leaving, she walked over and sat down on the mat beside him, cross-legged, watching him catch his breath. "I said don't help me," he repeated, quieter this time. "I'm not helping you." Avery kept her eyes forward, giving him space to compose himself without an audience staring directly at him. "I'm sitting here." "Why?" "Because you look like you need someone to sit here." He didn't respond for a long moment. His breathing slowly evened out, his hand unclenching against the mat. "I've been doing this for 2 years," he said finally, his voice low. "Every doctor tells me something different. Some say I'll never walk again. Some say there's a chance if I keep pushing. I don't know which ones to believe anymore." "What do you believe?" "I believe I'm tired of falling in front of people." Avery turned to look at him properly. "I'm not people. I'm just sitting here." Something in his expression cracked slightly, the wall lowering by an inch. "Everyone who watches me fall looks at me like I'm something breaking apart in front of them. I don't see someone breaking apart." Avery's voice was steady, matter of fact, no pity woven into it anywhere. "I see someone who fell. So get back up." He stared at her, something raw moving behind his eyes, unused to being spoken to without softness wrapped around every word. Slowly, gripping the mat beneath him, he pushed himself back toward the parallel bars, his arms shaking, and pulled himself upright again. Avery didn't rush to help. She sat where she was, watching, present without hovering, and for the first time since his accident, Dohyun didn't feel like a broken man in front of another person. He stood there, trembling, gripping the bars, and looked over at her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't read too much into it," Avery said, echoing his own words back to him. The corner of his mouth lifted, the closest thing to a real smile she'd seen from him yet. That night, alone in his room, Dohyun sat by the window, staring out at the dark grounds, replaying the moment in the gym over and over in his mind. He thought about how she hadn't flinched, how she hadn't reached for him the way everyone else did, arms out, ready to catch him before he even fell. How she had simply waited, trusting him to get back up on his own. He realized, with a discomfort he wasn't prepared for, that he had started listening for the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. That he noticed when she wasn't at breakfast. That the days she avoided him felt longer than the days she argued with him. He didn't have a word for what that meant yet. He wasn't sure he wanted one. 3 days later, everything he'd started to feel was thrown into chaos by the sound of a car pulling through the front gates. Avery was in the garden when the maid found her, her face pale. "Miss Monroe, your husband is here." Avery's stomach dropped. She walked toward the front of the house and found Malcolm standing in the entrance hall, dressed neatly, holding a bouquet of flowers he clearly hadn't thought through, his expression arranged into something apologetic. "Avery," he stepped toward her. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. I blocked your number for a reason, Malcolm. I know I don't deserve you talking to me, but I had to see you. I had to explain." His voice wavered, practiced sincerity layered over every word. "Everything I did for you. For your mother, I panicked, I made a mistake, but it was never about the money, I swear it." Avery's arms crossed over her chest. "You took $3 million and didn't pay a single medical bill. I was going to. I got scared. I didn't know how to handle that much money at once. Stop." Avery's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "My mother is alive right now because a stranger paid her bills. Not you. A man you sold me to. Malcolm's face twisted, something ugly flashing behind his eyes before he smoothed it away. He's using you, Avery. Don't you see that? His grandfather forced this arrangement on him. He doesn't want you here any more than you want to be here. The second his family gets bored of this experiment, he'll throw you out just like they threw out everyone else. That's not true, Avery said, but something in her chest tightened involuntarily. Come home with me, we can fix this, we can go somewhere new, start over, forget any of this happened. He reached for her hand. She pulled it away before he could touch her. You didn't come here because you love me, Malcolm. You came here because you found out I'm living in a mansion, and you regret giving that up. His silence answered the accusation more clearly than words could have. A new voice entered the hallway, sharp with fury. How dare you show your face here? Vivian swept in from the entrance, her heels clicking against the marble, her eyes locking onto Avery with open contempt. After everything my son sacrificed for you, this is how you repay him? Parading around in some paralyzed man's house? Letting him buy your affection? Sacrificed? Avery's voice rose, disbelief overtaking her restraint. Your son sold me for $3 million and never paid a cent toward my mother's treatment. Ask him where that money actually went, Vivian, because it certainly wasn't spent saving anyone's life. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed, uncertainty flickering behind her outrage for the first time. That's not, Malcolm started. Tell your mother the truth, Avery said, turning to face him fully. Tell her where the $3 million went, since apparently she doesn't know either. The silence that followed stretched long and uncomfortable, Vivian's eyes narrowing at her son now instead of at Avery. The sound of wheels rolling against marble broke the tension. Dohyun entered the hallway, his expression carved from stone, his eyes settling on Malcolm with a coldness that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. You need to leave, Dohyun said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that silenced every other voice in the room. This isn't your business, Malcolm shot back, though his voice lost some of its confidence. You're standing in my house, harassing a woman who owes you nothing. Dohyun's gaze didn't waver. That makes it entirely my business. Vivian stepped forward, trying to regain her footing. We simply came to discuss a family matter. There is no family matter to discuss. Dohyun's voice hardened further. Avery is no longer your concern. Leave or I will have staff escort you off the property. Malcolm looked at Avery one final time, something desperate and pleading in his expression. Avery, please. This isn't who you are. Come home. Avery met his eyes without flinching. I don't have a home with you anymore, Malcolm. I don't think I ever really did. Vivian's face reddened with fury, but she grabbed Malcolm's arm before he could say anything further, pulling him toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, she spat. When his family gets tired of you, you'll have nothing. No husband, no money, nothing. I'd rather have nothing than what you tried to give me, Avery said quietly. The door closed behind them, and the hallway fell into silence. Avery's hands were shaking. She hadn't realized how much energy the confrontation had drained from her until it was over, her knees suddenly unsteady beneath her. Dohyun wheeled closer. Are you all right? I don't know. Her voice cracked. I don't know what I am right now. You're safe, he said, and something in the certainty of his voice made her believe it. She looked down at him, at the steady way he held her gaze, at the protectiveness that had replaced the coldness she'd first met in this house. Why did you do that? Defend me like that? Because you didn't deserve what they were doing to you. His jaw tightened. And because I wasn't going to let him take you out of this house. Avery's breath caught. Why not? He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his features before he could stop it. Because this house has felt different since you got here. And I don't want it to go back to how it was before. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the space between them charged with something neither had said out loud yet. That evening, Avery found him on the balcony outside his room, staring out at the grounds below, the night air cool around them. "Can I sit?" she asked. He nodded, and she settled into the chair beside him. "I looked into rehabilitation programs today," he said after a moment. "Ones I haven't tried yet. More aggressive, riskier. Why now?" "Because for the first time in 2 years, I want to try harder than I have been." He glanced at her. "I think you have something to do with that." Avery's heart tightened. "Dohyun, let me finish." His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "The first time you became my wife, neither of us chose it. I want you to know I understand that. I thought you were like everyone else who's ever walked into this house looking for something from my family. I was wrong. You didn't know me yet, no, but I know you now." He turned to face her fully. "You've become the person I trust most in this world, Avery. Not because of anything you asked for, because of everything you never asked for." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't look away from him. "I'm not asking you to stay because of an arrangement my grandfather made," he continued. "I'm asking you because I want you here. Because the first time, they brought you to me. This time, I'm asking you to come to me." Avery's hands trembled in her lap. "Dohyun, are you? I'm asking you to choose this. No contract, no money, no obligation." His voice was steady despite the vulnerability written across his face. "Just you and me, choosing each other for the first time." Avery reached forward and took his hand, holding it tightly in both of hers. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you." He exhaled, something in his shoulders releasing after 2 years of carrying tension no one else had noticed. He lifted her hand and pressed it gently against his chest, and for the first time since his accident, Dohyun felt like a whole person again, sitting under the night sky with the woman who had never once treated him like he was less than that. Months later, Avery stood in a hospital room that looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. Evelyn sat upright in bed, color returned to her face, strength returned to her voice, laughing at something the nurse had said as she prepared for discharge. "You're really taking me home today?" Evelyn asked, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I'm really taking you home today." Avery's eyes filled with tears. Happy ones this time. "The doctors say your recovery has been remarkable." "I had a good reason to fight," Evelyn said, glancing toward the doorway where Dohyun waited quietly in his chair, having insisted on coming, despite Avery telling him he didn't need to. "Is that him?" Avery nodded, helping her mother into a wheelchair for the trip downstairs. "That's him." Evelyn studied Dohyun for a long moment as Avery pushed her toward the door. He met her gaze steadily, a flicker of nervousness crossing his composed features. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly to him. "For saving my life. For taking care of my daughter when no one else would." "She took care of herself," Dohyun said. "I just stopped getting in the way." Evelyn smiled, reaching out to take his hand briefly. "I like him," she said to Avery, loud enough for him to hear. Avery laughed, the sound light and unguarded, wheeling her mother out into the sunlight where a car waited to take them home. Behind them, in a city they'd both left far behind, Malcolm sat alone in a small apartment, staring at bank statements that told the story of money already spent, opportunities already lost, a wife who would never come back to him. Vivian's calls went unanswered on his phone, each one a reminder of promises he'd made and broken beyond repair. They had gambled everything on the belief that money could replace love, that greed could disguise itself as sacrifice. In the end, they were left with nothing. So Hyun continued his rehabilitation in the months that followed, slow and difficult, filled with setbacks that once would have made him retreat into isolation. Instead, Avery sat beside him through every failed attempt and every small victory, never treating his recovery like a project to be solved, never treating him like anything less than the man she'd chosen. He never fully regained what he'd lost. Some days were harder than others, but he stopped hiding from the world, stopped assuming every kindness was a transaction, stopped believing he was someone people only tolerated out of pity. On a quiet afternoon nearly a year after Avery had first walked through the estate gates in a red dress, believing she was there to save her mother's life, she stood in the same garden where he had once told her the truth about her husband, where she had once told him to get back up. Dohyun took her hand, steady now on his own 2 feet for the first time in years, his legs still uncertain beneath him but no longer failing entirely. "I never thought I'd stand here again," he said quietly. "You didn't do it alone," Avery said. "No," he agreed, looking at her with something unguarded and complete in his expression. "I didn't." What had begun as a transaction, a betrayal, a $3 million deal made in desperation and greed, had become something neither of them had believed possible. A marriage built not on obligation, but on choice. Not on money, but on the kind of trust that couldn't be bought, sold, or taken away. Avery Monroe had arrived at the Yoo estate believing she had lost everything. She left it having found the one thing that was never for sale. The treatment worked. Evelyn walked out of that hospital on her own 2 feet, and Avery finally understood that the man she'd feared the most turned out to be the one who never lied to her, not even once. Sometimes the people who come into our lives through the worst circumstances end up teaching us what real love actually looks like. Malcolm had $3 million and still lost everything that mattered. Dohyun had nothing to prove and ended up with everything worth having. Money can buy a wedding. It can never buy a marriage. And the people who truly love you don't need a contract to prove it. They just show up, again and again, especially on the days you fall. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And stay close, because there's more where this came from. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.